Today, we're jumping right into the middle of the online gender wars. We're going to look at some raw, unfiltered perspectives on everything from parenting and dating all the way to marriage to try and figure out why it feels like the gap between men and women is turning into a canyon.
So let's kick things off with a story that really gets to the heart of the issue. This is a real message from a single mom, and she's terrified about her 15-year-old son. She thinks he's getting pulled into these online worlds, incel and red pill communities, which are often known for being super critical of women. Her fear? It just perfectly sets the stage for the conflict we're exploring today. And look, this isn't just about some anonymous trolls arguing in a comments section. As our first source shows, this whole disconnect is hitting people right where they live. It's sparking these really personal, painful fights inside families, especially between mothers and their sons. According to her, it was like her son changed overnight. He got hostile, started using some really ugly language, and she thinks she found the reason why. She looked at his internet history and said it was just packed with this red pill content, stuff that often pushes a really critical view of women and modern feminism. And then the fight hit this just devastating low point. The mother says her son took her past trauma, the abuse she got from his absent father, and threw it right back in her face, basically saying she deserved it. It's a truly shocking example of how these online ideas can cause some serious, real-world damage.
Now, what's really interesting here is how the source material shows two totally different ways of looking at this. The mom, she's pointing fingers at outside forces, the internet, her aggressive ex-husband. But the online commentators featured in the source, they have a completely different story. They blame the family setup itself, a single mom household and no strong male figure to keep him in line.
Okay, so that tension inside the family, it's really just a small-scale version of a much bigger war. And that war is playing out in the world of modern dating. That's our next big battleground. In one clip from our sources, a woman uses some incredibly intense language to talk about the pain of dating today. She actually calls it a war crime when someone builds a connection with you but has zero intention of committing. It really shows you the deep sense of betrayal that can come from these casual relationships or situationships. And there it is, the word at the center of so much of this debate: situationship. These undefined, what are we kind of relationships? They're basically a minefield for misunderstanding and hurt feelings, and as you'll see, they're a huge source of friction between men and women right now. But then boom, here's the counter-argument you'll find in the source material. A male narrator just flat out says, hey, women aren't being traumatized by men, they're just feeling the consequences of their own bad choices and partners. It's a really blunt take that completely flips the script on who's to blame. This leads us to another huge question that the sources keep bringing up. What is going on with men? Why are so many of them apparently afraid to approach women? That whole traditional dynamic seems to be falling apart, and the sources have some pretty interesting ideas about why. And this slide really breaks down all the risks that men seem to feel. The sources talk about this whole spectrum of fears, right? Everything from just social anxiety and not wanting to get rejected to way more serious stuff, like being afraid of false accusations. And then there's this feeling that for years, they've just been told that being masculine is somehow toxic. Meanwhile, on the flip side, the sources describe a totally different kind of pressure that women are feeling. Several speakers talk about this fear of becoming invisible on the dating scene as they get older, losing that pretty privilege they might have had when they were younger. So, with all this anxiety and mistrust floating around the dating world, it naturally spills over into the next big thing: marriage. Is it still this noble goal everyone should strive for, or has it become some kind of dangerous trap? The source material shows this major split in thinking about marriage. On one side, you have the argument that men basically have a social duty to get married and have families to keep society from falling apart, even with all the risks. But the other side says, hold on, for the average guy, the legal and financial dangers of a marriage going south are just way too high to ignore.
And to really hammer this point home, the sources bring up a recent scandal. It's about a conservative influencer who built her whole brand on traditional values. While she was posting these photos with her fiancé, she was also allegedly having an affair. This story gets used as a kind of cautionary tale, saying, look, you can never really be sure who you're committing your life to.
And these are the specific, concrete fears that the sources say are making men hesitant about marriage. It's not just about getting your heart broken. It's about the very real risk of financial devastation, dealing with a legal system they see as biased, and maybe even losing access to their own kids.
The fallout from this whole breakdown? Well, as the source material presents it, it's pretty severe. We're not just talking about arguments online.
They frame this as a full-blown crisis with actual life or death stakes.
This might be the most staggering statistic that comes up. One source claims that men are 9 times more likely to die by suicide after a divorce. It's a number that just stops you in your tracks and really highlights the incredible emotional toll a failed marriage can take.
In this exchange, this right here captures so much of the frustration that seems to be fueling this whole thing. It's from a debate about male suicide, and you can hear it. The second someone tries to talk about men's issues, the conversation immediately gets derailed with, "What about the women?" The feeling, as it's expressed in the source, is that men aren't even allowed to talk about their own pain without it being challenged.
So all of this circles right back to our main theme, the great disconnect. In this last section, let's just look at the human cost of this gap between men and women getting wider and wider.
When you actually listen to the people in the source material, you just hear this overwhelming sense of exhaustion from everybody. You've got a 46-year-old woman who's just tired of being alone, a younger woman who's tired of putting in all the effort. And then from the male perspective, this kind of resignation, basically saying it's easier to just play video games than deal with the dating scene.
After going through all these points of friction, the sources really do leave us with a pretty bleak picture. You have men and women who both feel lonely, frustrated, and completely misunderstood by the other side. So the ultimate question is there any way to fix this? Is there a path back to actually connecting? Or is this great disconnect just the new normal?